Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Well, today, we come full circle from those anxious times.
We in the West may have to deal with a number of possible adversaries.
One epoch has ended, and a second is commencing.
Fight on the beaches. We shall take to the landing ground. We shall never surrender. Nobody knows what Soviet Russia and its Communist International Organization intends to do in the immediate future.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
Tear down this wall.
What more truly noble material could there be than these ungainly slabs of concrete, steeped as they are in heroism and history?
The best one, I think, today in the whole world is probably, ironically, the Holocaust Museum in Washington. It's interactive, it's exciting. This is on the same plane. This is a fabulous asset you have here. It's one of those kinds of museums where you communicate with history and you just get into it. An hour or two by yourself and to just take yourself through the century that was Churchill's century.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Rob Havers, proud director of America's National Churchill Museum. I welcome you to Fulton, to the campus of Westminster College, and to the 65th anniversary Churchill Weekend. Thank you. 65 years ago, the entire world paused to hear the prophetic words of Sir Winston Churchill delivered right here on the campus of Westminster College. That vivid image that he gave us of an iron curtain descending seared itself into humanity's consciousness to define almost half a century of international relations and world affairs. Standing at the very podium where he uttered those words tonight with the British flag behind me that flew in 1946 behind Sir Winston Churchill makes me feel his presence in this very room. Churchill the man was always one to enjoy the finer things in life. He once said that my idea of a good dinner is first to have good food, then discuss good food, and after this good food has been elaborately discussed, to discuss a good topic with myself as chief conversationalist. Those ingredients are definitely here tonight for this evening's celebration with this good food and this good company. The only ingredient missing, of course, is Winston Churchill himself as the chief conversationalist. I'm certain, however, he would approve, given that he will be the chief topic of conversation for tonight's festivities. We have a number of dignitaries, a number of honored guests that I would like to recognize before we dine. We are so pleased to welcome our keynote speaker, British Ambassador Sir Nigel Sheinwald. Accompanying him today is Her Majesty's Consul General in the Midwest, Robert Chatterton Dixon. Representing the state of Missouri this evening is Terry Maglich, Community and Economic Development Manager, and Padalis, Manager of the International Trade and Investment Office. On the historical front, we have a Westminster graduate, a member of the Skulls of Seven party that escorted Winston Churchill in 1946, Mr. Baxter Watson. We have also in our audience tonight Richmond McClure, grandson of Westminster President Frank McClure, the man who issued that famous invitation to Winston Churchill. I want to recognize a few members of the Board of Governors of the Association of Churchill Fellows, Suzanne Richardson, former senior fellow who was instrumental in making this evening happen. Suzanne, thank you. Mr. Richard Mahoney, a member of the Board of Governors for a considerable time, who has, through his generosity and vision, made possible the exciting new sculpture that will grace the front of the museum in due course. Mr. Mahoney, thank you so much. And I will recognize also Mr. Bill Tyler, William H. Tyler of Carmel, California, our current senior fellow. Additionally, it is a pleasure to welcome Mr. Jody Paschal, President of the Mid-Missouri Chapter of Friends. Thank you, Jody, for being here tonight and for all your good work. Of course, this elegant evening and memorable evening would never have been possible without our many sponsors. Thank you all for recognizing the importance of this evening and for being our sponsors tonight. A special note of gratitude to Wells Fargo's advisors. They deserve a round of applause. Novus International. Thank you to you both for stepping forward to support us at the benefactor level, to Boeing for agreeing to be an underwriter, and our supporters at the sponsor level, Emerson, Edward Jones, and Ambassador and Mrs. Stephen Brower. We appreciate your support. And now, at this time, before dinner is served, I would like to call to the podium Rachel Holloway, Westminster sophomore from Overland Park, Kansas, to deliver the invocation. Thank you.
Let us pray. Blessed are you, O God, your faithfulness incomprehensible, your grace unmerited. You grant in us the desire for peace and give us leaders who challenge us into action. As we reflect this weekend on the enduring legacy of Winston Churchill, we remember him saying, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen." As we continue to work towards peace, may we not only be grateful for the freedom Churchill's service has provided, but also let us embody his call to courage. Thank you for gathering us together in this place. Bless our food and fellowship at this, the 65th anniversary of Winston Churchill's Sinews of Peace. To you be the kingdom, the power, and the glory. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, good evening. Another warm Westminster College welcome to all of you, and we thank you very much for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Barney Forsyth, and I'm the 20th president of Westminster College. I'm honored to have been asked to introduce our featured speaker for this evening. And before I do, I want to thank Rob Havers and all of the wonderful team from Westminster College and America's National Churchill Museum for giving us this spectacular evening. We're so proud of you. Well done. Our keynote speaker this evening is Sir Nigel Sheinwald. And he has had a long and distinguished diplomatic career in service to his country. His service appointments have included London, Moscow, Brussels, and now Washington, D.C. From 2000 until 2003, he served as the United Kingdom's permanent representative to the European Union. Prior to his appointment to Washington, he was foreign policy and defense advisor to former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He has served as the United Kingdom's ambassador to the United States since October of 2007. Tonight he will speak to us on the topic Honoring Churchill at Fulton, Changes and Continuity in International Relations. Now, if you read Sir Nigel's article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch the other day, you know that he is well aware of the significance of this occasion, and even more aware of the importance of Anglo-American relations. What an honor it is to have a world leader of his stature on our campus, a leader whose life of service has made a difference not only to his beloved country, but to the whole world. Now please join me in a warm Westminster College and Churchill Museum welcome to our honored guest this evening, Sir Nigel Sheinwald. Sir, it's an honor to have you here at Westminster.
Thank you very much. Thank you. President Forsyth, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a great pleasure and an honor to be here at Westminster College, this place to which President Truman brought Winston Churchill in March of 1946 has come to stand for a crucial moment in the relationship between my country and yours, and to stand at this lectern where Churchill himself stood here in 1946 is really an enormous privilege. And I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Rob Havers, the Executive Director of the Center here, and Sir Max Hastings, who will give the Kemper lecture tomorrow. Now, I will take my inspiration from Churchill today. I'll argue that the world has of course changed greatly since he stood here in 1946. And those changes require close attention from those of us who make and implement foreign policy, because their implications are profound. Yet there are also certain constants of international relations which Churchill himself would recognize and embrace today. And I want to discuss three of those: ideas, values, and alliances. And I will end, as Churchill did, on the alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. It remains of great importance to our and other countries' security and prosperity in the years ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, Churchill spoke here at an extraordinary moment in world affairs. The world was emerging from the most devastating war in human history. That war had produced a new weapon of awesome destructive power. The atomic bomb cast its shadow over Churchill's speech, as it did over the decades to come. Soviet Russia, until then a wartime ally, was emerging as the West's great adversary. And it was of this that Churchill warned here in Fulton, to his American host's discomfort. Yet he did so even as George Kennan penned his seminal long telegram in the American embassy in Moscow. On this, as in so many other things, Churchill's thinking proved ahead of its time. Yet that post-war moment was also one of great hope and opportunity. In January of 1946, the United Nations had held its first meeting in London. Later that year in June, the World Bank started its operations, and the following years would see the Marshall Plan, the birth of NATO, and the development of treaties and agreements that would evolve into the European Community, now the European Union. Today's world would in many ways be unrecognizable to Churchill and his contemporaries. The world of 1946 held only 78 independent countries. Today, there are nearly 200. Its population was around a third of today's. Its economy was around 1/15 of the size it is now. World trade is several hundred times greater today than in 1946. And though many of the world's population still have too little to get by, the unprecedented rise in global living standards since '46 has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty and brought untold comfort to hundreds of millions more. Science and technology have revolutionized the way we live, the way we think about ourselves and the world around us. And for me, as a practitioner of policy, one of the most profound impacts of those changes is the degree to which, in today's world, we are linked to and dependent on each other. That was, of course, already clear in 1946 in the aftermath of the war. But today, our interdependence extends far beyond the sphere of war and peace. It's hard to think of a part of our lives which does not involve some international dimension. From the things we buy to the networks we use to stay in touch, from the energy which fuel our economy to the ideas which fuel our minds, all are implicated in chains of global connection. And the ease with which we can connect with and learn about each other around the world has huge benefits. But it also creates new and complex threats, from the threat of global pandemics to the emergence of global terrorist networks, from cyber attacks to international crime. And familiar threats manifest themselves in new ways through the risks of nuclear proliferation to terrorists, for example. Today's threats come less from other states than from non-state groups. Behind them lies a complex and interlinked set of factors, including weak and fragile governments, conflict, and the competition for resources. Now, Europe itself has seen profound change, from the devastation of 1946 to a European Union of 27 states, stretching from Galway to Gdansk, and as Churchill said here, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic. Churchill talked here about the pacification of Europe. The success of the European Union and NATO has made war between European countries unthinkable in the future, but it took over 40 years to deliver a Europe both whole and free as the countries of Central and Eastern Europe reclaimed their national identity and brought the Cold War to an end. Now, I want to talk about the constants too, which Churchill would instantly have recognized. I want to consider some of today's challenges through the prism of three such constants: ideas, values, and alliances. First, ideas. Churchill spoke here as the great ideological standoff of the 20th century was taking shape. The metaphor of the Iron Curtain, forever associated with this college and this town, came to define an era. Churchill didn't live to see the end of the Cold War, but I imagine that he would confidently have predicted it. His faith in the superiority of democratic and liberal values shines through his speech here and his whole career. In some senses, he became a symbol of those values and the sacrifices which have from time to time to be made to keep them alive. Now, it might be tempting to conclude that the end of the Cold War marked also the end of the global battle of ideas. That seems at best premature, as nations such as China find a growing role in international affairs, and as change and transformation are unfolding in the Middle East, we must be as energetic as Churchill in making the case for shared rules and liberal principles. That does not mean expecting the emerging powers simply to cleave to our way of doing things. That would be naive. But neither does it mean resiling from the idea that free and open markets, the rule of law, respect of private property, and representative government are good for nations and good for the world. There is, though, a more urgent battle of ideas today which we need to face, that with the religious extremism which countenances and can lead to terrorism. Islamist extremism is one form of this. We can't avoid discussing it, but we need to be very clear about our terms. Islam is a religion observed peacefully and devoutly by over 1 billion people. Islamist extremism is a political ideology supported by a small minority. The debate between intolerance and openness, fundamentalism and modernity, separation and integration is taking place within Islam as much as between Islam and other faiths. Countering that extremism and the terrorism it can fuel means being very clear about this difference. It requires us to think hard about our own societies and about the principles that underlie them. British Prime Minister David Cameron has called for a muscular liberalism, which where necessary asserts and enforces the core beliefs we hold about people's rights and their obligations to one another, and the core national identity which these principles articulate. And it requires us to succeed in Afghanistan, to prevent that country slipping back into the hands of Al-Qaeda, and to help Afghans to build a political settlement there which offers the chance of a more secure future. My second theme is values, and it's closely linked to my first. I want to start with a quote. "We must never cease to proclaim in fearless tones the great principles of freedom and the rights of man. The people of any country have the right, by free, unfettered elections with secret ballot, to choose or change the character of any government under which they dwell. Here are the title deeds of freedom which should lie in every home. Let us preach what we practice, let us practice what we preach." Those lines come not from a leading article from today's newspapers about the Middle East, but from Churchill's speech here in Fulton. Churchill was preoccupied not just by the threat of war, but also by the threat of tyranny. His concept of the special relationship and fraternal association of English-speaking peoples was rooted in that shared set of liberal values he set out, and he believed that we needed to promote those values internationally as the best security for the future. To borrow a phrase from a rather rockier period in British-American relations, we still hold those truths to be self-evident today. Our values are so much part of our national identity that they must, by definition, be at the heart of the projection of our nations abroad. Now, of course, there are difficult issues here. Foreign policy makers are often characterized as either idealists or realists. I suggest that, in fact, we need to be both, and we are conscious of the tensions. We know, as Churchill did, that in the long term, our interests are best advanced by the spread of liberal values. But Churchill, despite his long-standing hatred of communism, saw clearly that the UK interest lay in building a wartime alliance with Soviet Russia. Now, thankfully, these tensions are not so stark today as they were in the war against fascism, but they're still there, including in calibrating our response to the rise of people power in the Middle East today. We sense we are entering a world where young and networked populations will be ever more intent on exercising their rights. They, not we, will determine the nature of that change, and that's as it should be. Our task is to get on the right side of history and promote change and renewal. But it's not unreasonable for us at the same time to want that change to happen peacefully, in a way that avoids or limits regional instability and preserves the human and economic ties with Europe and America which have been built up for decades or centuries. So the most significant lesson we should draw from events in the Middle East today is the importance of values. Protesters across the region are united in one thing: their aspiration for the rights and freedoms that we take for granted in the West, and their hope that we will help them to achieve them. These events have reinforced our conviction that those values are indeed universal and not limited by history, by nature, by nation, or by creed. Lastly, let me say a word about alliances. Churchill's speech here is best remembered for its metaphor of an ideological dividing line, not its argument about alliances. Yet what he called special associations between like-minded countries were at the heart of his argument. In particular, here as throughout his life, he spoke of the fraternal association between the English-speaking peoples. Now, we might today shy away from Churchill's phraseology, but we haven't shied away from the relationships through which it's articulated, the Western Alliance, and indeed the special relationship between the UK and the US. On the contrary, those alliances are vital to our security and our prosperity today. Now, it feels almost unfashionable to make this argument. All the talk today is of new partnerships with China, Brazil, India, and the other emerging economies. Speeches are filled with statistics on their rates of growth, their thirst for natural resources, their gleaming new infrastructure. And I'll give you just one example. It's hard to estimate China's GDP in 1946, but to the best extent we can do so, China's economy today is almost 50 times bigger than it was when Churchill spoke here 65 years ago. And of course, as I said before, these developments in world affairs are of great significance. The rise of the new powers is a major force shaping today's world and perhaps the most important vector of change. But its implications are still complex and uncertain. We don't know yet how the emerging powers will position themselves in the world order, whether that order will need further to adjust to accommodate their rise, and how they will define their interests as their stake in global governance gets larger. India is already a great democracy, but pursues her interests in her own way, mainly focused on her immediate region. China, as I have said, poses us the challenge of promoting strategic cooperation and the pursuit of mutual goals despite the absence of shared values. And it's still, we lack a shared willingness to define interests and responsibilities broadly and in global terms. Absent those, China may be the US's most important relationship in this century, but it's far from being a durable partnership, let alone an alliance. Another part of the case against the Western alliance is that its component countries are in irreversible decline. Americans worry whether their global preeminence can be maintained in the face of an economic crisis, political divisions, and concerns over public deficits. Europeans worry that their single currency is in crisis and about the dynamism of their economies. Both sides, to different degrees, worry about immigration and national identity, their aging populations, the cost of their entitlement programs, and of course about competition from the emerging powers for the jobs our people need. Yet these fears are still some way ahead of the economic and political reality. The US still spends more on defense than every other nation combined, 9 times more than China. Its economy will be larger than China's in absolute terms for at least the next decade and probably longer, and in terms of purchasing power, it may be so effectively forever. Its soft power remains huge. The world's top students, researchers, inventors, and entrepreneurs are queuing up to come here, as they have done almost since the start of American history. The European Union, taken together, remains the world's largest economy. People are queuing up to get into Europe too. Its standards of living remain the envy of the world. And despite the rise of the new powers, the developed nations will remain powerful engines of future growth if we can make the transition to the high-value, low-carbon, knowledge economies we're aiming for. Between us, the US and UK represent 50% of all citations in global science. We've won half of all the Nobel Prizes ever awarded. We have between us all of the world's top 10 universities. We are each other's largest investors, with 1 million jobs in each other's country, depending on that investment. Indeed, UK investment in this country is 570 times the level of China's. We are the two top troop contributors in Afghanistan, as we were in Iraq, and close allies in dealing with the threats of terrorism and proliferation, including in Iran. And we share intelligence and technology at a level no 2 other nations approach. Now, these aren't just empty facts or statistics. They speak to the security and prosperity of our people and of people in other nations too. This is an alliance which delivers and is in our mutual interest. It is, as our Prime Minister has said, indispensable, a word that Churchill, of course, used too. Alliances occupy a distinct place in international relations. They are bigger than their parts. They magnify power and influence. They give an alliance leader like the US a starting point, community of interest with a group of countries which pack a punch in their own right. No country, even the US, can go it alone. So it needs allies in fighting wars in Afghanistan or in working to liberalize international trade and deliver a sustainable economic recovery, or in trying to promote reform as well as productive relationships in the Middle East, or in countering Iran's nuclear program, or looking at energy security in the remainder of this century. My contention is that operationalizing the transatlantic alliance remains a key element in a successful American foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, international affairs are about the transactions between countries and the addressing of complex and multi-dimensional problems, but they're also about relationships between people. Churchill traveled here, as many of you know, by train with President Truman, a 24-hour journey during which they played poker and talked, and along the way they agreed to call each other Winston and Harry. At about 2:30 a.m., as the train steamed through the night, Churchill put down his cards and declared that if he were to be born again, he would want to be a citizen of the United States. There is, he said, no other country where a man knows he has an unbounded future. The only custom he deplored was that Americans had stopped drinking with their meals. Doesn't seem to have stopped you this evening. Before he left America, at the end of a visit lasting more than 2 months, Churchill gave a last interview to the New York Times, and as it happened, the interviewer was his own son, Randolph. Asked if he had any message to give the United States, Churchill replied that it must pursue consistently the great themes and principles which have made it the land of the free. All the world is looking to the American democracy for resolute guidance. If I could sum it up in a phrase, I would say, dreadnought America. So I want to conclude today with that message of optimism. The world has changed profoundly since Churchill spoke here. We face a set of complex challenges and threats which require our vigilance, our energy, and our good judgment. We worry about the shape of the 21st century world which is emerging and our own place in it. But let us not also forget the strength of our ideas, of our values, and our alliance. They are not the stuff of yesterday or a relic of the past. They are the tools we have to meet the challenges of the future. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, all right, okay. Can I stand here for a second? Yeah.
Sir Nigel, thank you very much. If I could call to the podium Mr. William H. Tyler, Senior Fellow of the Board of Governors of the Association of Churchill Fellows. Mr. Tyler.
Mr. Ambassador, we welcome you and we're honored to have you here as our guest at Westminster College. Now it's my privilege to now induct you into the Association of Churchill Fellows. And if you will allow me, I will read my charge, if I can find my charge, which was given to me by my good friend, Suzanne Richardson. Thank you for doing that. She did it in large type, so I can't, you're out there somewhere, Suzanne, I can't see you right now. The Association of Churchill Fellows of Westminster College was created in 1969 at the time of the dedication of the Winston Churchill Memorial and Library. It's an honorary society of individuals concerned with the National Churchill Museum and Library, and through its Board of Governors, the association serves in an advisory capacity to the President and the Board of Trustees of Westminster College in matters relating to the operation, support, and overall management of this unique historic treasure. Congratulations. And I have a medal for you here. It's got a Velcro strip on it, so I think we can manage here. Try to line this up properly. Robert, you're going to help me. Maybe I can do it. With Velcro, you can't make too many mistakes. I think we're okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You can have this case.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Mr. Tyler, thank you very much. Sir Nigel, I have also a small token to present to you in appreciation for your joining us this evening for delivering such an interesting and substantive address. We hope this will not be your last visit to Westminster College, to the National Churchill Museum, but it's my privilege to present to you a beautiful numbered print of a watercolor of the Church of St. Mary. We hope it'll find a place in the British Embassy and remind you of us in Fulton, Missouri, and encourage you to come back in the future.
Well, just to say thank you very much to both of you for inducting me and for the very fine print. As it happens, anyone who lives in London has to be a huge fan of Wren, and it is wonderful to see the church here in the Midwest in Fulton. Where I live in Greenwich in southeast London, we have another example of Wren, which is the Naval Hospital. I hope that a number of you will get a chance to see that during the Olympics next year. 500 days to the Olympics. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, you should have seen how many toasts we wanted to have originally till we cut them down. It has been a wonderful evening, a grand evening, and evenings such as this do not occur spontaneously. I'd like to acknowledge briefly some of the key people and individuals who have made this wonderful commemorative celebration for all of us to enjoy. First and foremost is Westminster College's own Julia Dunlap, whose vision in planning, in overseeing and executing this event made this special night what it was. Mr. Rob Krause for his work in helping with the planning and the execution of the event, creating tonight's program and doing the wonderful public relations job that he did to promote this tremendous weekend. Thank you, Rob. As always, a huge debt of gratitude to my staff at the National Churchill Museum, to Sarah Winiger, to Kit Freudenberg, Amanda Plyburn, Elizabeth Murphy, and the newest member of our team, Mida Young. Thank you to you all for your support and hard work. I would like to heap praise, as always, on the Fresh Ideas team of Giorgio Kosic and all his people for the outstanding meal they served us tonight. Thank you very much. Next on the list, the Westminster College IT department, Chris Ferguson and Brandon Bice, for all their efforts to make the light and the sound and the magic work in the fashion it did. Thank you, gentlemen. Bruce Vanderlecht and the Westminster College plant operations crew, thank you to you too, gentlemen. A wonderful campus, a wonderful evening. On behalf of Westminster, the National Churchill Museum, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. It has been a tremendous celebration of the life of Winston Churchill and the 65th anniversary of that memorable speech. For those of us, however, who do not want the evening to come to an end, there is still a little more. We have a signature Churchill touch to top off the event. Winston Churchill liked to say he never felt as though he could leave the pub before closing time. When you leave here, I would like to invite you all to join us for port and cigars at the National Churchill Museum itself. For those of you unfamiliar with the path, we will have staff to guide you, and I hope if you cannot make it tonight, you will all be there tomorrow, however, for our Kemper lecture delivered by Sir Max Hastings, another guest of honor, who will talk about Winston Churchill, the indispensable man. That lecture at 2 p.m. in the Church of St. Mary, the Virgin Aldermanbury. There is a small caveat to the invitation for port and cigars, however. When Winston Churchill came to Callaway County in 1946, it was a dry county, much to his dismay. Things have changed. It is obviously, judging by the toasts, no longer a dry county. That takes care of the port. The cigars are tremendous cigars, donated by a sponsor in Jefferson City. Westminster College is a no-smoking campus. You will need to take your wonderful cigar in memory of Sir Winston and smoke it at your leisure somewhere else. Thank you. One of the last remarks that Winston Churchill made to President Frank McClure before he left Westminster 65 years ago was that he hoped that he had started some thinking that would one day make history. Winston Churchill undoubtedly fulfilled that vision. His lecture that day represents one of the most significant predictions for the direction of the world and for the latter part of the last century. His leadership, his example, his legacy has guided the mission of the National Churchill Museum since 1969. We at this treasured institution will continue to reach out beyond Fulton, beyond Callaway County, beyond Missouri, and we will not be satisfied till the National Churchill Museum is known throughout the United States as the foremost center for an understanding of the life, times, achievements, and legend of Sir Winston Churchill. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Good night.